I wish all the 20 and 30-year-olds, early 30-year-olds know this stuff, because I could have saved myself so much trauma.
Women looking at our productivity and output on a daily basis. The idea that you kind of clock in 9 o'clock, you clock out 5 p.m. and you have the same output every day.
You know what? I'm not like a man. I work on a 28-day cycle. Men have a 24-hour testosterone cycle. The more we understand that, and the more we understand that we were never meant to have a 24-hour cycle, we will understand how to make the most of it through cycle syncing. Okay. I think intermittent fasting should be cyclically done for women. Yeah. And it's not a good thing to fast throughout. I'd love to say, get off gluten, dairy, sugar, soy, peanuts, and you'll be fine. But that's not the case. We are not what we eat. We've been told this a lot, right? We are what we absorb. There are so many people who eat really clean, but nothing changes. It's because there's a problem with the gut.
But if you layer this kind of knowledge in and amongst your diet, your habits, your routine, it really just amplifies what you're doing in another way. All right, balancers. Today's guest is someone I'm really excited to have on. It's a topic I'm personally very passionate about. I've actually not had a guest on to talk about these topics for, I'd say, a good year and a half. So I'm excited to not only get a refresher in the space, but also learn about any updates in the industry, things I may not know. And the topics we're basically going to talk about today revolve around gut health. Bit of a buzzword at the moment, but it's really interesting to me to get the foundations of what it is, how to know if we have good gut health. Are there any easy practical things we can do every day to look after our gut health? Just wrap our heads around that. There's another beautiful conversation that we're going to have about cycle syncing. So for my ladies listening who feel a bit like me in that we were misinformed a lot at school, or the quality of education we had growing up about our own cycles, it's wild to me how much of a gap there is in terms of what there actually is to know about it. So learning about this stuff as I get older and older is really fascinating to me. And then we're also going to touch on cortisol, something you guys may have heard of. It is got a lot to do with stress, a big factor in day-to-day life and long-term health. But I think we'll get straight into it. I'd love to introduce today's guest, Rashi Chowdhary. She's a nutritionist who's passionate about helping you reconnect yourself through food. And of course, she's an expert in all the topics we're going to be talking about today. So Rashi, a warm welcome to The Balance Theory.
Thank you, Erika. Now that I've heard you sum everything up, I feel like these are really hot topics right now, all three of them. You know, cortisol is trending, cycle syncing people are leaning more towards. And I think gut health has been around for a while, but I think people are now understanding why it's so important, you know?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to pick your brain on all these things. But just before we get into that, I'd love to ask you about how you ended up niching into these areas. And correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand, like the topic of nutrition and being a nutritionist is quite broad. And I find like all the nutritionists I've spoken to, they end up kind of niching into whether it's female health or gut health, or, you know, they find their own little avenues. So how did you kind of land on these topic areas?
My journey, I think personally to me, is very interesting because initially I took up nutrition only because I just wanted to be a thin person, you know, because all my life with my family, I've seen everyone be overweight. And I was like, this intuitively as a child, I knew this doesn't feel right. So it was just for that reason. And then I took it up, I studied it. I had no motivation of making a career out of it. But I kind of like, you know, did a little bit of nutrition stuff, which was more about calories in, calories out. It's all about macros and all of that, right? And then I landed up having a condition called endometriosis. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I've heard about it, but please, you're probably well more versed than I am.
1 out of 8 women have it now. It takes about 8 years to diagnose. You know, women who are told as a child that stop being a drama queen. It's just pain. It's a painful period. It's okay. That happened to me for 8 years. So for 8 years, I had pain that was so excruciating that I would not be able to do anything on those 2 days, the first 2 days. I have stitches right here because I fell once and I was bleeding so profusely. Like, it's really bad, that type of pain. But I was told pop painkillers, and painkillers won't help suppress that kind of pain. Then at one point, I remember I finished my period, but the pain just didn't go away. And it's called an endobelly, really bloated, you know. And it's a very difficult disease to diagnose. So once they found out that I was diagnosed with it, I had to immediately rush into surgery. And post that, the trajectory of my career and my life changed a lot because I realized, despite being a nutritionist and following all conventional nutrition practices, I had it wrong, like something was totally off. And that's when I started to like unlearn everything I'd learned, and I kind of gave up on conventional nutrition because it was exactly the opposite of what I was supposed to be doing. And 1 out of 8 women are like me, So there are a lot of women who need to eat and start looking at nutrition in this way. So I feel that was a turning point for me. And then very recently, I'm going to be turning 40 now. And 2 years ago, I understood that I'm going through perimenopause, which a lot of women listening, I don't know if you have women who are above 35, but around 35 is when perimenopause kind of begins, right? So I started to realize I have that issue, and then I had to find ways to sort of solve it. Because with doctors and gynacs, most often it is get on OCP or get on hormones, right? Or IUDs.
Yeah.
These are all very common. So I feel because I've kind of denied the conventional medicine nutrition stuff and found my own way, and then actually gotten out of those, symptoms and issues, I feel my confidence in trusting natural nutrition, natural food, real food, and I think supplements as well, is big.
Yeah.
And then that's what I'm doing with all my clients and all of that. And again, gut plays a big role, right? In
100%.
all of these things.
100%.
Yeah.
I think let's lean into a little bit around the menstrual cycle and cycle syncing first, since we've kind of you've touched on that. And I love that that's been an anchor for your niche. It's always so beautiful to me when people lean into their passions or a personal struggle they've had and then use that as the catalyst to help others. I think that's really admirable. So you mentioned something important, and that was you had to unlearn a lot of things that you had learnt.
Yeah.
What were some of those things with regards to the menstrual cycle? And what new foundings or understandings do you now have about that you teach your clients?
Yeah. One thing I always ask my clients, especially when they come for with a whole lot of hormonal problems with their period, I always ask them, I'm going to ask you this as well. Do you believe this statement, my period is my power? Do you believe it?
I've never heard it. And truthfully, thinking about that statement, I can't say that I align with that as a statement at the moment. But I'm open to changing, my mind being changed.
No, so here's the thing, right? I don't believe it fully myself. I'm still trying to lean into it because there's so many years of conditioning where we are taught that period makes you weak. Having a period makes you weak. We'll never feel like our period is our power. And it's so important for us to feel that way, because I tell my clients most often, they'll be like, I hate it when I get my period, right?
I think that's probably the more conventional approach to it, right?
Yeah, most people say, I just hate it. I don't like it. I feel weak. I feel I'm bleeding. I don't feel my best self. I get acne, all of this stuff, right? Which is not supposed to be the case. But I think whether we go back to patriarchy, you go back to industrial revolution, or you go back to, religion, there's such a strong association between women, period, and guilt and shame and things like that. Without getting into details of that, the point is, I feel it's important for us to start feeling like our period is our power, because when you lean into that, you realize, you know what? I'm not like a man. I work on a 28-day cycle. Men have a 24-hour testosterone cycle, right? But everything revolves around them right now. All the clinical studies, most of the things are tuned to them. For us, it's been very recent. Up until 20 years ago, we were not even part of too many clinical trials, right? We know this now. So we operate on an estrogen-progesterone cycle, and the more we understand that, and the more we understand that we were never meant to have a 24-hour cycle, we will understand how to make the most of it through cycle syncing. Cycle syncing is nothing but changing your lifestyle based on the phase of the menstrual cycle you're in.
Yeah, I find this so interesting, even just to the simple point of women looking at our productivity and output on a daily basis, right? Especially if you're someone like me that's come from corporate, and I'm sure a lot of industries go hand in hand with this. But the idea that you kind of clock in 9 o'clock, you clock out 5 p.m. and you have the same output every day. As women, it's physically impossible. And I'm now having this new kind of struggle as I'm working for myself, because it's more obvious to me, I'm not able to actually, what 100% every day is actually looks completely different. One day that looks like 150%, and some days it looks like 20%.
Yeah.
But being okay with that is something I'm still unlearning and trying to recondition myself on. But it really comes down to this point of acknowledging the basic fact that we go through such an ebb and flow. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about, I understand there's a luteal follicular phase, there's different hormones that come out at different moments in time. And actually, as I'm now starting to think about starting my own family, I've really gone deep on this process, understanding the release of the egg, how that's prepared, what hormones get released, and you know, the cycle following after, and understanding that has given me power. So when you go back to your statement, my period's my power, I've kind of understood that my cycle is my power because I understand it. But I think you're probably better placed than me to, I guess, talk about the different phases, and then maybe we can discuss either some nutritional things or actual lifestyle changes we can make to really amplify those two phases.
I love what you just said. Like, this is what it means, right? My period is my power. My cycle is my power. It's kind of the same thing. Because now you have more knowledge and awareness. A lot of people will not relate to this because they'll just be like, what does this mean? So then I tell those clients that, listen, it's about compassion. If nothing else, cycle syncing and understanding estrogen, progesterone, and the ebb and flow will make you more compassionate towards yourself. And that can't go wrong, right?
Because then you're not frustrated if you're in a, you know, like just before your period where your hormones are a lot lower, your energy is a lot lower. You're frustrated with your output, but it's actually like, actually, I understand what's going on at this period of the month.
I'm not meant to lift 60, 70, 80 kgs of deadlifts on the day of my period. I've actually done that to myself, you know, in my 20s. So for me, it's also about, I wish all the 20 and 30-year-olds, early 30-year-olds know this stuff because I could have saved myself so much trauma, you know? So let's start with the menstrual phase, right? So first we have four phases in our menstrual cycle. The first is the menstrual phase where obviously you're bleeding. Then is the follicular. Then is the ovulation. And then is the luteal. The luteal you can divide into two halves, but you know, for right now, exactly. So the menstrual phase, this is where obviously you're bleeding. It's like your inner winter. All the hormones are at rest. But the beauty is at this time, delta waves are the strongest. So our brain waves change as well. They don't change, but some waves are more heightened at this time.
Okay, so delta is the strongest brainwave, is that right?
No, delta is the slowest one.
The slowest one, okay.
And we also around this time have the weak theta.
Okay.
Now, both of these together and the combination of the hormones being really low, FSH is a hormone, you know about FSH.
Yes, the stimulating hormone.
Yeah, so it starts to rise a little bit, but it's still on the down low.
So FSH is the hormone that
stimulates the follicle.
The follicle to produce the egg.
Correct.
Yes,
right?
so that happens as you start to bleed, as it's leaning towards ovulation.
As soon as. So imagine, so what I like to do is I've given each of these hormones little names because that's exactly what they do. So I think follicle stimulating hormone is like she's a scholar. Right? She's very studious and she's very meticulous. So from the beginning, she starts to choose which follicle should fully mature and where the egg should come out from. And around this time, because of this FSH going slightly up and these brain waves changing, we will want to rest, relax, recover. But at the same time, there is heightened emotional processing happening, a lot of introspection. So this is a great time for women to go for therapy sessions. Ask yourself, I tell my clients this, you know, some women are just very conflicted all the time. They feel like, I want this, but I have this.
Oh my God, just feel like you're just reading into my soul.
So this is the time where I tell my clients to be like, ask yourself these questions. What are my core values? And are my actions aligning with my values? Because most often when the outcome is not what we want it to be, it's because somewhere our actions are not aligning with our core values, you know? So ask yourself why, because you're optimized for these kind of questions. Ask yourself, am I really being my best version with my friends? Are my friends really my friends?
So be very reflective during that menstrual phase.
Yeah. And of course, it's also an inflammatory time because you're shedding your uterine lining, right? So things like ginger root tea, cinnamon powder, these are great to be adding during that time.
Okay.
Also, I prefer to stay off a lot of gluten and dairy.
Because it's inflammatory, generally
It is
speaking.
inflammatory. And this is an inflammatory process. You want to support your body. You want to like rest, relax, not trigger your gut. So it's best to keep off these things during this time, especially. That doesn't mean that, I mean, most people love their donuts and, you know.
Pasta.
Yeah. And I feel like what I do is I batch, like I'll make these brownies and I'll make a whole lot of cookies which are healthy and just put them in the fridge so that I'm not, you know, calling for these other things, right? So anyway, so this is the menstrual phase.
One question before we move on to the next phase. So you mentioned this is like akin to a winter. Does that mean for any reason you would look to have winter foods like soups and warming things? Is there any correlation on that side?
Oh, for sure, right? Also, you want to bleed enough. Between 20 to 80 ml is normal. A lot of times, and this is more for women who are slightly older, their bleeding becomes a lot lesser, more scanty. So having things like sweet potato, a lot of root vegetables, a lot of soups, pumpkin, all of this really helps as well during menstruation. And you want to do all the anti-inflammatory things as well.
Sure.
So this is the menstruation phase. Great time for cacao ceremonies. Have you been to any of these in Dubai?
I haven't, but I've heard about them.
Cacao ceremonies, anything that's going to make you reflect and think about what's really going on. Yeah. Then we have the follicular phase, which is when you finish your bleeding. From that day onwards, the follicular starts. Now, this is a great phase, right? I won't say it's the best, but it's a great one because estrogen is dominant. And you also have slow alpha waves, which are dominant. Now, the combination of this is amazing because estrogen, she's queen bee, okay? She loves building things. She's building her business. She's building her career. She is building her family. She's doing all of these beautiful things. She's an anabolic hormone. So she's going to build muscle. This is a good time. She also has, think about queen bee, right? She has this I can do it attitude. She's positive. She's motivated, all of that stuff. So this is a good time to do a whole lot of social events, meet people, socialize. It's also the time where testosterone starts to go up a little bit. So you will feel a little bit more sexual. And it's a good time to, even have difficult conversations, which sometimes you don't want to have them during the luteal phase, right?
Yeah.
It's a great time to start new diets, which feels slightly harder. It's a great time to do intermittent fasting.
Okay.
I think intermittent fasting should be cyclically done for women.
Yeah.
And it's not a good thing to fast throughout.
Yeah.
But this is your time, when you're in your follicular phase.
Yep.
Also, estrogen is dominant, right? So you want to do things like maca root, red clover tea, flax and pumpkin. These are amazing. By the way, I have to say one thing. Women who are on OCPs cannot do it. I mean, not cannot do anything, but won't relate to this.
OCPs being?
Oral contraceptive pills.
Right.
Where you are basically, suppressing all these hormones, right?
Yeah.
With artificial hormones. So they will not relate to this. But women who have regular menstrual cycles and are not on any pills will definitely understand. I'm sure you can draw a correlation, right? Like once
100%.
Yeah.
That's like the time where I'm doing my best lifting at the gym. I'm feeling more inspired and motivated. The more I've learned about this, the more I can see it correlate to, and when you think about it, that's the time. I as I said to you, I'm kind of on this journey now where I'm learning about it more from a reproductive point of view, and it makes sense. Your body's getting ready to potentially conceive, and
Correct.
so you're gearing yourself up to put yourself out there and be more social. Like from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense that that's the time when you're putting yourself out there.
Absolutely, right? It's just amazing how when you learn to understand this stuff a little bit more, because then again, you can do so many things specifically for estrogen.
Maximize that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So flax and pumpkin are great.
Do you mean like the seed? Yeah.
Yeah. Have you heard of seed cycling?
Seed cycling? No.
So seed cycling is where they've now, again, look, just 20 years ago, we were kind of given it was acknowledged that sexual differences have an effect on biology, so there are not too many studies on these things, right? But the few of them that are there, we know that seed cycling works because in the first 2 weeks, your estrogen is dominant, so you have flax and pumpkin. And the next 2 weeks, because progesterone is dominant, you have sesame and sunflower. So people rotate their seeds as well. But anyway, so coming back to, so this is your estrogen, your follicular phase, and then is your ovulation. Now, we ovulate just on that one day.
Yeah, it's like a 24 to 48 hour window, right?
Yeah. But the funny thing is a lot of women feel like menstruating is the main event. Actually, ovulation is the main event of your cycle. That's the showstopper.
That's the point of...
That's the point. It's a myth that if you get your period, you're definitely ovulating. There's a possibility. That's called an anovulatory cycle. We're actually not ovulating at all, right? That's just a withdrawal bleed. So with ovulation, it's that one day where the egg comes out. But obviously we call it like a phase, and we say about 3-4 days because the sperm stays alive for that long, right? Now, this is our best phase because LH is high and beta waves are high. Now, beta waves are going to improve cognition, and on a primal level, you want to attract the right mate because you want to get pregnant, right? On a primal level, you will look your best. Your lips will be plump. Your skin is going to be a lot better. Your hair will feel a lot better because you're, and also you'll feel more sexual. This is the best time to obviously have sex if you want a baby. And if you don't want one, then this is the worst time to have sex, obviously. But yeah, this is your best time. This is where you lift your heaviest, run the fastest. Like I said, your cognition abilities are a lot better, and your verbal communication becomes a lot better. So again, a great time to have for confrontations, you know, because of these waves, you are also more receptive to what the other person has to say. You know,
It's like you're in your most authentic power at that time, right?
Exactly. A lot of people say this is the best time. And of course, a spiritual teacher can help you more with this. But I think the new moon or the full moon falls around this day, then it's a great time to write your manifestation lists or whatever, right? There's something like that I've read about. Don't know too much about it. But so LH, she's the miracle worker.
For anyone who doesn't know, it's a luteinizing hormone.
Yeah, luteinizing hormone. When she surges and she rises up, that's when the follicle will burst and the egg comes out. If she doesn't rise, it's not happening, right? Like you're going to have an anovulatory cycle. Now, why I like to call her the miracle worker is because what she's doing is that once the egg comes out, that follicle, it becomes the corpus luteum. I don't know if this is too technical, but the corpus luteum is what then eventually becomes a sac for the baby. If you're going to get pregnant, right? Yeah. So she has such an important job. And the fact that she can make an endocrine organ in just a couple of, few minutes is a big deal, right? So imagine that much power and that much creativity we have at that time because the LH is surging. And then, of course, during this time, I feel it's important to do all the other things right so you ovulate. It's not like there's a specific food that you're going to eat on that day to make it better, but
it's the lead up, right? And it's the build up and it's the correlation with all these hormones because LH won't surge if you don't have enough. If FSH hasn't done its job, there's no point of,
exactly.
It's crazy how they all correlate.
So. Yeah, it's literally FSH, LH, estrogen, progesterone. 4 of these have to have their dance going on for you to have a healthy, normal cycle. Now, if this is what is happening, how can we expect to be, like you said, 100% every day?
And we haven't even spoken about the luteal phase yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the real kicker. That's what really throws us off. We've had a good month so far. We're gearing up for ovulation, which is like the main event. But then we ovulate and then it's like luteal, which I think is what I wouldn't say is the biggest struggle, but it's the most shift in our energy or the way we need to approach it. So let's talk a bit about luteal phase. Is it a surge of progesterone at that point?
Last 2 weeks is where the progesterone goes up and then drops. The minute the progesterone drops, that's when your menstruation, you get your period, right?
Right. So if you're pregnant, it never drops. It stays high.
Because the corpus luteum will keep secreting progesterone to give.
Okay.
Yeah. I like to divide it in 2 phases, and people listening, and if they do practice it, they'll realize it. The first week after you ovulate, you're still good because you have faster alpha waves, which means you'll be closing a lot of projects, great time to do a lot of accounting. You're still very, upbeat, especially if your hormones are okay and progesterone is not. Progesterone is like the mother hormone. Okay? How do you feel around your mom if you have a good relationship with your mom?
Yeah, bless her, love her. Safe, relaxed.
Comforted, all of that stuff. That's exactly what progesterone's job is, to make the endometrial lining soft and cushiony enough so the implantation happens properly, right? So actually, that's how we should be feeling around this time, where we feel relaxed, we feel safe, we feel more in our body, all of that stuff, but it doesn't happen, right? Most people, most women are struggling with this progesterone, and we have low progesterone, but we can come to that later. So progesterone goes up and comes down. That's when you have menstruation. While it's going up, you want to make sure that you are eating the right foods. For progesterone, like I said, flax and pumpkin are great. Holy basil, licorice tea, Whitex and chasteberry are great. But I'm saying all of these very casually, but you have to speak to a nutritionist or a doctor.
Yeah.
It's very important.
Caveat the whole conversation with none of this is individual advice. You have to work with someone one-on-one. It's just general chat.
Exactly. So what is challenging is the last bit.
Just before we go back to the menstrual cycle.
5 days before that. Here you want to just relax, right? You don't feel the same peppiness and zest because it's your inner autumn, right? Progesterone's gone up. Also, the brain waves around this time, towards the end, are strong theta, So what happens around this time, if you notice, is very strong inclination towards intuition and spiritual awareness. So people who want to explore the spiritual side, this is a good time to do it, more of the spiritual practices. That's why it's great to do things like yoga and Pilates and slower workouts around this time, because your body is more like, you'll optimize things that
Sure.
way.
Yeah. This makes so much sense. I mean, I know before I spoke about it from how we approach work and everyday output,
Yeah.
but even from a training point of view. So at the moment I'm doing, I love lifting weights. It's kind of my primary fitness activity at the moment. And I like doing like 6 to 8 week challenges, but I find I always have this problem where I get to like, depending on when I start the program,
Yeah.
but I'll do like week 1, 2, maybe 3, where I'm like progressively overloading, I'm getting really strong. And the 4th week, it's like I have to drop all the weights.
Yeah.
And at first it was really disheartening, but then I started to up my menstrual literacy and understand what's going on. And now it's like, well, just make that week, the last week, the second half of the luteal phase, make it a deload and then go back in and reset the site. So it's not as simple as just do an 8-week program. I think if you have this kind of literacy, it helps you with your progression and your output and how you understand how you're feeling rather than feeling frustrated, because I feel like that's something you can really get stuck on, especially if you're comparing yourself to male counterparts in the workplace or gym or whatever it is.
Or even females, right? She could be ovulating, which is why she's lifting the way she is.
That's right. Yeah.
And you can just be beating yourself up. And I've done exactly this, you know, whereas I just so hard on myself, and I'm not supposed to be lifting 80 kilos when I'm bleeding.
Yeah.
So what happens, and a lot of women will notice this, when they are bleeding and they lift really heavy, suddenly the bleeding will become a lot lesser.
Interesting.
Because
Why's that?
the cortisol goes up, and when we can, we'll get into this, like it's a whole pregnenolone steal that happens because pregnenolone is making cortisol. So it can't make enough progesterone, There's just so much that goes on. But like, you've also stressed your body out too much, right?
Yeah.
When you're lifting so heavy. So those are the things that you leave for your follicular and your ovulation phase,
And I like the visual of utilizing the seasons, because it's kind of like, what do you do in the autumn and the winter? Like you're harvesting, you're protecting resources, you're keeping it low key and kind of outside of the harsh winds. If you're trying to go outside and do things in a harsh storm in the winter, it's not going to really work out for you. So looking at the month like the seasonal cycle, I think is a really nice visual to just give yourself grace through that period.
No, for sure. But you know what happens sometimes when you said this, right? Like during this, so there are some of my clients who'll be like, my husband loves socializing. And sometimes she'll go along and sometimes she'll be like, I just don't want to go.
Yeah.
And most often it's because she's in the luteal or the menstrual phase, And sometimes it's really hard to actually, so I do want to say this because a lot of times there's so much shame attached, and women are amazing at feeling shameful and guilty, right? So cycle syncing is not another way for you to feel guilty. You have to do the best you can. It is about compassion. It is about, okay, I'm not at my best to do this particular activity, but if I have to, at least I have the awareness that it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where that compassion piece comes in. And I think that's a very important piece to talk about when we talk about cycle syncing, so that women don't feel like, oh, but I have an important event when I'm menstruating, I have to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, it's understandable, you have to go. But the times you can move things around, which is a lot of times we really can move things around and they are in our control, then you can do it,
100%. And this is really like this whole first part of our conversation today really goes to the point of your cycle is your power. And when you understand this, it doesn't mean you're going to feel powerful 24/7. It means you have the knowledge to work with the ebbs and flows of your cycle, which really, if we bring that all back to the heart and essence of this show, when we talk about having balance in life, this is something like, whether you like it or not, as women, we feel every single day, right? It is an ever-present part of our life. And we can talk about having goals and a morning routine and being on a training program and all these things. But if you layer this kind of knowledge in and amongst your diet, your habits, your routine, it really just amplifies what you're doing in another way. And half the time, the way you think and feel about something impacts your life experience more than anything else.
Oh, 100%.
So I think just really embracing this and brushing up on your menstrual literacy is the best thing you could do. And as I said before, I feel what we got in school, for better or for worse, even, the 10, 20, how old am I now? 15 years ago when I was in school, it just wasn't there. But I think the conversation's slowly coming to the table and more people are imparting that onto their children. I just think it's a very empowering topic. So.
It is. And till we don't feel our period is our power, we can't empower our little girls, right? I'm not very maternal, but I have a niece. And I'm just like, will she ever believe this? if me and her mom don't say this or we don't feel it, she's
Yeah.
not going to believe it, right? So it's really important that we do this not just for ourselves, but also the generations to come,
100%.
Yeah.
Let's move on to gut health, something I'm really interested in and fascinated about. Maybe we can just start very, very simply. There'll be some people who have heard a lot about gut health. Some people maybe are still new to it. Can you just give us a very simple overview of what it is when we talk about gut health, and maybe any just recent discoveries that are interesting that you want to share?
So let's start with where do you think is the gut? Where is the gut?
Like around the stomach somewhere?
Yeah. Whenever I ask this to people, they're like, it's here,
Yeah.
We say this because most of the microbiome that we have in our body, bacteria, viruses, pathogens, they mostly 90% is here. That's why we say the gut is here. But actually, in my opinion, and all experts have a little bit of a different opinion here, but the gut starts from our nostrils and goes all the way till our anus. We are not what we eat. We've been told this a lot, right? We are what we eat. We're not what we eat. We are what we absorb. And our gut, it has two major functions: absorption and protection. Protection from the outside world. It's a very thin layer, right? And then, of course, absorption of nutrients and minerals and all of that. There are so many people who eat really clean, but nothing changes. They just, a lot of times nothing changes, or some people just don't gain weight, or some people are just still sick even though they're eating clean. It's because there's a problem with the gut. So I love leading with this, that we are not what we eat, we are what we absorb, and your gut does exactly that. And I think now we know, right? Like, the reason that gut has got so much importance is because we know, especially after COVID, 80% of our immune system lies right here. It's in our gut. 90% of serotonin, which is a happy hormone, is secreted in the gut. The gut is called our second brain. Have you heard of this?
Yes, I've heard that.
Yes, everyone knows this now. But what we don't know is that 500 million neurons come together, form this complex structure, which is outside of the brain. And if I had to cut off the communication of the brain and the central nervous system from this structure, it would still independently be able to be functional.
Wow.
Which is true only for this specific, for our gut, which is why it's called the second brain, right? When you have to go up on stage and talk to 500 people, you have this little
Nervousness.
butterflies.
Yes.
What is that? You're stressed here. You're like, oh my God, I hope I don't forget what I'm supposed to say. I don't know how it's going to be. You're stressed here, but you're feeling it here.
Yeah.
That's the gut and brain connection right there. You know about the vagus nerve?
Yes.
So that is like the most studied, the most researched nerve, which tells you that the communication is bidirectional, right?
It's so it's the nerve that connects the brain and the gut.
Based the brain to the gut, back and forth. There are many other ways that the gut and brain are connected, but this is the most researched, the biggest one that we know of. So when people are gassy, bloated, constipation, they have diarrhea, loose stools. If you're not okay here, you're not going to be okay here.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And then your gut has a lot of other functions, right? Even hormones. Have you heard of estrobolome?
No, I haven't.
So estrobolome is this microbiome, like it's the name of a set of microbiome that actually control estrogen metabolism.
Okay.
So if you don't have enough estrobolome, then your estrogen metabolism is affected. And estrobolome is nowhere but your gut, right? The way you eat has a massive impact on which microbiome you're going to grow. We know, have you heard of FMT? So
learning a lot today.
Fecal, but this is a bit gross and I was not sure if I want to mention, but because you said, let's talk about the new stuff. Fecal microbiota transplantation, which means simply, and this is not new again, this has been there for a while, it's just that's not become mainstream. You take the poop out of a healthy person, you shove it up into the system of an unhealthy person.
I have heard this, yes. Yeah. And it almost replicate, like them bacteria will kind of flourish or replicate in the system.
So the example, so the study I read or wherever I saw this, I can't remember, it was a while ago. They took out the poop of, there were two sisters. One was really athletic, one was, overweight and all of that. Took her poop out, the healthy one, and put it into the one who was like overweight. And she started to drop the weight. That's how, and then of course after 3 months she gained it back because
lifestyle.
No, exactly. So I feel our root cause, most people say a root cause could be because of the gut microbiome and stuff. It's not. That can assist the process, but ultimately if you're not going to put in the work and you're not going to do the basic lifestyle stuff, your microbiome is also obviously is going to convert into the bad stuff as well again, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good study to demonstrate that your gut is kind of like your foundation, but it's not something that you just have and then tick, move on. It's something you've actually got to maintain.
Yeah.
So with that study, do you literally mean they obviously have to do something and like extract the bacteria, right? They don't just...
No, of course. Yeah. There's a whole process.
Yes.
But it's happening. There are
So
people who are
interesting.
doing it, right? I think Dave Asprey was the one who's gone, don't quote me on this, I'm not sure, but he's the one I think who went ahead and actually has, or he's in the middle of developing these labs now where you can actually go and get this done to make it more mainstream because it's working. It's just that after that, you have to do a lot from your side to make sure that you keep growing the good microbiome because otherwise there's basically dysbiosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to correct that.
So what are the lifestyle factors that equal or equate to a healthy microbiome?
If you're not having any trouble with your gut and you're absolutely fine, then for you, the best thing would be diversity. Eat as many different types of foods, introduce as many different types of herbs, do all of that stuff because what you eat is what your microbiome is going to eat. And then based on that, they'll multiply. Having said that, we started the gut cleanse program. I've started that almost 2.5 years ago. And we now know it's not that simple. You can't just eat everything. There are some people who eat everything or eat all the good stuff and start feeling miserable. So if you're someone, I always tell people, if you're someone who, because not everybody needs to avoid gluten, dairy, sugar, right? I'd love to say, get off gluten, dairy, sugar, soy, peanuts, and you'll be fine. But that's not the case. So now after these 2.5 years, we've understood from all the research that we've done, there are 3 types of gut. Either you have a bacterial type, or you have a fungal type, or you have an immune type.
Okay.
So bacterial type would be...
Is this something you're born with?
Maybe there's a possibility that could be genetic, obviously. But a lot of times I think because of epigenetics, we know, right? Genes is not everything. It's a lot to do with the lifestyle. So, the bacterial type are the ones who'll be like, every time I eat something healthy, it becomes worse for me. When I eat too much fiber, I feel worse. Do you know such people? Yeah. So suppose they eat a lot of broccoli, they eat a lot of salads, they'll feel worse. This most often is a sign of SIBO type. So that's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You have too much bacteria overgrowing and you're better off without salads. These people feel wonderful on meat and rice.
Interesting.
This is the bacterial type. Then comes the fungal type. The fungal type are the ones who are pretty much the opposite. When they eat too much starch, mango, bananas, rice, they don't feel so great. And they feel better on Brussels sprouts, raw vegetables, broccoli, spinach, asparagus, things like that, right? So these are the types who are bacterial, more like Candida style. Candida has also become really common now. So they'll benefit more on like a paleo style diet, but obviously not keto. And then we have the immune type. Immune type are the ones who have allergies very easily. They have a runny nose a lot of times. Monday they'll eat something, they'll be fine, but on Wednesday the same things will not work for them.
Right.
These, they have allergies, very prone to allergies.
Yeah.
These are the immune types where the histamines are too high. Have you heard of histamines?
Yes. Yeah.
So histamine intolerance, or the histamine is too high, or they need a DAO enzyme to calm themselves down, or they just need to eat for a while low histamine foods. So, it's not as simple as,
it has to be very much individualized.
It has to be, because our gut is just, my gut is individual to me.
So with those 3 types, is it the case that, say I'm the bacterial type, the first one, is that me for the rest of my life, or can it change?
It has to change.
Okay, so are these 3 states where you would want to get out of, but you're just suggesting, or are they just like default states where you are?
So I was bacterial type, right? Salads would not suit me. Now I can sit and eat a big bowl of salad and I'm just fine. But why did I become that type? Because I went keto in the middle. Calorie counting, keto, like I was properly calculating all of that stuff. And I didn't have enough fiber in my diet. So then I landed up with this situation. And of course, it also had to do with my endometriosis. And it's never just one thing,
Of course, everything works in tandem.
It's always a combination. So the goal is to be the first type where I said you want microbiome diversity.
Right.
Where even if I eat gluten, dairy, sugar, I'm fine. There's always a threshold and I've reached my threshold. I know if I eat lentils every day, I'm not okay. But if I eat it once and twice a week, it's fine.
Yeah.
You know?
Because when you were just sharing those 3 types, I don't really, at the moment, I used to be, I think, the first type, bacterial. Now I don't really feel I'm any of them, but I do feel like something I've noticed is things like quinoa and legumes. If I have them too many days straight, I've noticed the threshold because I like meal prepping.
Yeah.
But if I put quinoa in more than twice in a row, it's like I can't handle it. I bloat instantly, whereas the first 2 days were fine.
Correct.
But generally speaking, I don't feel I have intolerances and I feel quite good eating a variety of things.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that things to maybe look out for would situate you in one of those 3 states or indicate you maybe don't have good gut health?
So the way you know you don't have good gut health, your body will tell you, right? Like your body is always giving you signs. Bloating, things like have you seen the Bristol poop chart?
I think I have, but it's like still quality,
Very
right?
common, right?
Yeah.
You just type Bristol poop chart, you'll see those 7 types of poop that appear and you need to know which one you are. 3 and 4 is ideal. But a lot of times people who have poor gut health will be, in the extremes. You don't want that. You want your poop to look very similar to the shape of your intestines.
Right.
So it has to be long, it has to be smooth, it has to sink in the bowl, right? But a lot of times people have pellet-like poops or it's diarrhea. That is clear, it's IBS.
Right.
And there are 3 types of IBS and let's not, it'll just get really complicated.
So many webs.
You can literally branch out into any of these topics. But the point is that if you are feeling great and there's no problem with you and your hormones are fine, stay in that first category where you're eating all sorts of things. I personally don't love gluten, dairy, sugar as on repeat because I think the way things are processed now has changed a lot. Gluten is not what it used to be so many years ago. So I feel it's better to keep it on the down low, but you don't have to eliminate it.
Yeah.
But then if you fall in this bacterial, fungal or immune type, then you figure out what you need to eat for a while. And like you asked, is it all your life? No. But for that particular period, consider that you're in rehab.
Yeah. Makes sense.
It has to be like that. You have to do an elimination diet. It's gold standard.
Yeah.
There's no other way. Because you can do an intolerance test, but how many people benefit from that? Sometimes they really do. But most often people are like, no, but when I eat, like say legumes, I feel terrible, but it's showing that I can eat it.
Yeah, I've
it's
actually done one before and there was something that was aggravated. I did this a few years ago. I worked with a naturopath. It was like I had an inflammatory marker, but my intolerance test showed I was intolerant to nothing. So really in that case, it was deeper work that needed to be done. But just quickly, because I do want to ask you about cortisol before we wrap up the conversation. For someone listening who's like, I love the idea of cycle syncing and eating with my cycle, but I can also feel like I need to focus on my gut health. Which one's more important to start with?
Wow. I'm so glad you asked this because my clients ask me this all the time. It's your gut.
Yeah.
It's your gut. It has to be your gut. So don't think about cycle syncing and trying to, sync your fast according to the cycle and all of that stuff. Because I could tell you, yes, you need to eat legumes in the first half for your estrogen because that's what estrobolome feeds on. But if lentils don't suit you, it's pointless, you know. So like I said, that rehab and elimination plan is very, very important till the inflammation settles down, till your gut feels safe, and then you can slowly, in the enrich phase, start adding things back in.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And is a nutritionist the best person to work with for your gut? Is it a naturopath? Is it a combination? Obviously you're a nutritionist, but what are the types of professionals that are best suited to help you with gut?
Look, it's a very personal choice, right? You'll have to go to someone who knows what they're saying, who you resonate most with.
Trust.
I think, who you trust. I think trust is a very big thing when it comes to healing, right? So you have to trust the expert you're going to.
I think I'm more asking I don't really know what the qualifications are around gut health. So would there be something you'd want to look out for? Is there a certain qualification you can get in gut health, or is it more that just they've studied and become experts in it? What are we looking out for to know that someone's qualified to help us?
So I feel a functional medicine doctor would be able to help a lot. Having said that, what I've noticed is that you come back with a whole lot of supplements when you go to a functional medicine person, whether it's a doctor or a nutritionist. You just come back with a whole lot of supplements. And then that becomes very confusing. So I feel sometimes you genuinely just doing an elimination diet, which you can get off the internet sometimes, can actually work initially. And then if you're still not feeling better, then you go to an expert,
Okay.
I think going to a nutritionist is great because she can work with you one-on-one and explain things to you. But if you feel like that's not the best choice, then find a functional medicine doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever you decide, or whoever's listening, if there's something that they want to look into, definitely not taking general advice and applying it to yourself. I think personally has been a mistake I've made in the past. So just working with someone one-on-one to get actual feedback around you personally is really important.
I think one-on-one is the way to go.
Yeah.
But then there are some people who just, are do-it-yourselfers.
We'll try things,
Yeah,
see if it works.
they try things, they see what they want to do. And I think it's important for us to lean into that wisdom of our own body as well. So I always tell people, okay, try and do it yourself. If you can't, there's so much help.
Yeah.
Right?
100%. All right, let's get into cortisol quickly before we wrap the conversation up.
Yeah.
It correlates to stress. We need cortisol, but too much of it is too bad. So you introduced something interesting to me. I've never heard of it. Is it the OAT axis or the OAT axis? How do you?
Yeah, OAT axis. Yeah.
Talk to me about that and how it correlates to cortisol.
When you talk about cortisol, it can never be spoken about by itself, right? Like you said, small amounts, you need it, it balances us out, all of that. But when do we need cortisol? When, suppose we're sitting here and suddenly the fire alarm goes on, right? Cortisol goes up, it goes up, does its job, all of that, and then it starts to go down and gives by feedback loop. It tells our HPA axis, which is the part of our body which responds to stress, to calm down. It says, oh, I'm right here, it's good. But when your cortisol is high, and we'll come to the OAT axis, it's constantly high, what's happening is the alarm is not stopping. And that's where a lot of us are today, especially a lot of women. The alarm doesn't stop ringing. So your cortisol is just constantly high. Eventually your HPA axis is completely dysregulated. Now, why the OAT axis is so important is because I feel this is, it's going to become mainstream. Everyone's going to be talking about it. But when I discovered this, I realized, okay, I don't need medication because every doctor told me to get on IUDs or hormones for my perimenopause. But all girls who have PCOS, estrogen dominance, thyroid, Hashimoto's will relate to this conversation. So basically it starts with your adrenals. Your adrenals, ovaries, and your thyroid. They're constantly communicating with each other.
Via hormones, right?
Yes. But imagine a three-legged stool. If it's nice and, it's on a flat surface, you feel safe sitting on it, right? But what happens if one leg is just not okay?
Not balanced.
You feel so unbalanced, right? You just don't feel okay. And this is what happens with women. So many people say, I don't feel like myself. I don't feel safe in my body. This, when you start hearing yourself say this or feel this, there's a possibility the OAT axis is off.
Oh, right. OAT, so ovaries, adrenals, thyroid.
Correct. Yeah. But it starts with the adrenals because of the HPA axis. That's where it starts. So now your cortisol is high. What is cortisol made from? It's made from the mother hormone called pregnenolone. She's the mother hormone. She's making cortisol and also other hormones like progesterone, estrogen, etc. But mainly cortisol and progesterone. Now, if I have too much cortisol, pregnenolone is making that. Suddenly there's less progesterone. Right? So my ovaries aren't secreting enough progesterone because there isn't that much pregnenolone. Now we know that we need a delicate balance of progesterone to estrogen, right? Suddenly progesterone is down. What is dominant?
Estrogen.
And then suddenly you have estrogen dominance.
And what does that correlate to?
What happens when you have estrogen dominance? Acne, irritability, not being able to lose weight, gaining weight, especially here and here. And that's already happened because cortisol is high. So you land up with estrogen dominance. Now, it doesn't stop there because this was the ovaries, right? Now, the thyroid jumps in because that's what's happening in our body. There's a constant feedback, constant, each organ is helping the other one, right?
And thyroid's like control center of hormones, yeah?
Thyroid is our metabolism. That is like, you start the engine with it.
Yeah.
So imagine suddenly the estrogen is dominant. Now, your thyroid jumps in. And you know about the T4 and T3?
Yes.
T4 is the inactive one, T3 is the active one. When your thyroid jumps in to help your ovaries, the T4 conversion to T3 does not happen well. Now, if you don't have the active form T3, then you're left with hypothyroid. So now you have hypothyroid because you have estrogen dominance, because your adrenals are overworked. But it's so sad because when you have estrogen dominance, you land up with PCOS as well, right? Now imagine you're here and you have PCOS, you go to a doctor, what is she going to do? Take an OCP, take a metformin.
Go on the pill. Yeah.
What happens? Suddenly this entire communication is gone. You can't. This communication won't happen. So, but if you understand it's actually my adrenals, let me do things to figure out my cortisol, then a lot of things get balanced out. And I feel like you don't need to go on pills at all once you understand this.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me to understand the correlation of the thyroid with my cycle and the hormone releases, and how delicate, like you said, that balance is if you really throw stress, which correlates to higher than what we need cortisol, and that is constant. I mean, I went through burnout, which what I learned at the time was a complete overstimulation of my adrenals via constant stress. My cortisol was constantly elevated. And I had this really interesting experience where it got to a point where I felt like I couldn't react to anything. It was like my cortisol just wouldn't raise anymore. It was
flatline.
Yeah, a completely flat line. And it took me so long to get out of that. And it all started with stress management, understanding the pathways. But it's so crazy to me, like when we talk about menstrual cycle, like you don't think of how ongoing stress from a job you hate or from a toxic relationship or a toxic environment, how that ongoing exposure can impact your menstrual cycle. Like the correlation there isn't clear in everyday life, but when you think about the beautiful balance and dance of everything all together, it really just goes to show how important understanding your cycle is, or managing your stress, because of the knock-on impact it has, not just for I feel stressed, I can't sleep tonight, but the long term of everything that falls under that. It's such a complex, beautiful way our bodies work.
Yeah. And just leaning into that and understanding that saves us from a lot of trash. Because the minute you take the pills, and sometimes you have to. I'm not saying you don't need to ever take them, right? If your condition's really bad or it's gone out of hand, you go for it. But if you're able to actually understand this whole process and then one by one peel the layers off, by the end of it, you've come out as a very different human being. Because you're right, to peel away that stress, you have to start thinking, am I in a toxic relationship? Where do I need to draw my boundaries? Yeah, where is it coming from? It's like the tub analogy. Have you heard of it? It's like you have a tub, that's your body, and you have water overflowing, and the water is cortisol. What are you going to do? You're not going to stand there and take a mug and start putting out the water. You're going to turn off the tap, So where is that? You'll have to sit with yourself and figure.
The source.
Where is it? And that in itself can be such a journey.
Incredible. Well, I feel like we have just touched the tip of the iceberg on so many complex topics, but I think you've summed up really nicely and succinctly some really key things for people to sit with on the gut, on the menstrual cycle, and on cortisol. If the listeners want to connect with you, learn from you a little bit more, where's the best place they can go? And I'll pop some links in the show notes.
Oh, yeah. So I go by Rashi Chowdhary on Instagram, and that's the best way to reach us.
Amazing. Well, that's how we connected. So I'll definitely put some links in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today, for downloading your information, and for teaching me a lot.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you for having me. And I just hope it wasn't like a bit too technical.
No, I love technical. Technical.
Nice. Okay.
And I mean, all these things you can look up if you want to know a little bit more about LH, FSH, cortisol.
Correct.
Like they're all now little gems for people to think, I want to learn more about that. So it's always interesting to hear. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.